Mario Kart 64, the series' second entry, continued a tradition of revolutionizing the racing genre. It pushed forward with 16 brand new race courses. Retro courses wouldn't begin to appear until later in the series, as well as 4 battle stages. Join me in this deep dive analysis of everything you didn't know about every track in the game. 64 splits its courses into 4 cups, each with 4 tracks. Let's begin with the Mushroom Cup. Luigi Raceway. Mario Kart 64 launches a tradition of circuits named after Luigi. These tracks, called variously Luigi Raceway or Luigi Circuit, are often the simplest tracks of the game and act as something of an introduction to the game's racing world. Mario Kart 64 kicks this off with Luigi Raceway as the first course of the Mushroom Cup. This NASCAR-style track is fairly straightforward, highlighted on the game's website as a fine track for beginners, but it doesn't go without its legacy, perhaps the most prominent part being that it introduces us to Mario Kart's most infamous item, the spiny shell. It's actually accessible by any player with the skills to acquire it. The Raceway has the prominent feature of a giant Luigi-faced hot air balloon floating just above the track. But it's not just decor. Below the balloon hangs an item box that occasionally dips low enough to be snagged by a properly timed jump. This item box always dispenses a spiny shell, making it the first time this devilish item appears in the karting series. The item was introduced for several reasons, both as a strategic item designed to balance new players' chances with more experienced racers, but also as a necessity from a hardware standpoint. The Nintendo 64 wasn't quite powerful enough to process racers clustered toward the front for an extended period of time, so the item was designed to break up top-heavy clumps and keep the game running smoothly. Another noteworthy aspect of the course are the billboards sprinkled throughout, keeping consistent with the advertisement-lined real-world tracks that inspired it. These ads will have looked especially familiar for Japanese players, as many of the names represented parodied real Formula One sponsors. These references were wiped away for the stateside version, however. This is probably because developers became spooked by the possibility of copyright lawsuits and preempted any stereotypical American litigiousness with the changes. This proactive step was probably smart. Video game companies have frequently appeared in the courtroom defending themselves, often from lawsuits where individuals claim their likeness was used without compensation. This includes EA doling out an undisclosed sum to athletes Ed O'Bannon and Sam Keller for not paying royalties on their likenesses in NCAA basketball and football titles. Nintendo itself started its career in video gaming embroiled in a massive lawsuit with Universal, who sued Nintendo claiming the Donkey Kong arcade game ripped off Universal's own King Kong character. Nintendo eventually prevailed, however, thanks in large part to the efforts of lawyer John Kirby, who pointed out that Universal itself had earlier argued King Kong was public domain for their 1976 remake. If this lawyer's name sounds familiar, that's because the legacy of John Kirby's win is forever celebrated in the name of another Nintendo megastar. Universal and Nintendo seem to have settled their differences though, as Universal Studios Japan is now host to the Mario-themed Super Nintendo World, which itself features a Mario Kart ride. Tangents aside, here's the fake advertisers that appear in-game. Koopa Air. The Japanese version clearly parodies Goodyear, a major Formula One advertiser at the time. Luigi's, whose Western appearance is seemingly based on the now-defunct department store Bradley's, and whose Japanese appearance was a clear homage to Ajip, a fuel retailer that was a popular Formula One advertiser. Mario's star, whose Japanese appearance parodied Marlboro. This sponsor actually reappears in the first Mario Party as an advertisement in Slot Car Derby. Shot, which appears to parody the gas company Shell. Yoshi, whose Japanese version parodies another major gas company, Mobile One, and Nintendo itself, who is unchanged regardless of location thanks to the long-standing precedent of companies not suing themselves. One notable detail about Mario Kart 64 is how speedrunners have broken the game wide open. Decades of searching for glitches and exploits have made for some of the most entertaining runs in speed gaming. Masters of documenting speedrun history, like Summoning Salt, have made compelling deep dives on some of the game's most broken tracks. I won't go into anywhere near the same depth as they have already covered it so well, but I'll mention some notable track skips as we go. Luigi Raceway has an interesting one. Hitting yourself with a shell in a specific spot allows you to pass through the floor, skipping around 90% of the race. The catch, though? This only works in the Japanese version. If you're more familiar with the later series games, you might know this track from its reappearance in Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart Tour. Mumu Farm. The second stop on the Mushroom Cup Tour is through the dirt tracks of Mumu Farm. Even though it's the shortest track in the game, you do pass a number of interesting sights along your quick journey. The hills are populated with grazing Mumus, a delightfully uninspired character that first appears in this game. If Mumu sounds unfamiliar to you, perhaps it's because you played the Japanese version, where it's instead called Momo Farm, as cows in Japan express themselves phonetically a bit differently. This is an interesting aspect of language where animals across the globe have their noises represented in drastically different ways. Whatever sound they're making, Mumus don't do it much outside of the Mario Kart series, although they can later be found bumbling around in Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games and Mario Party 3. They're also given a nod in the Super Mario reskin of Minecraft, as the traditional cow design is overhauled with a Mumu aesthetic. Despite their relative rarity throughout the Mario universe, they are a major sponsor throughout the Mario Kart series. Billboards advertising Mumu Farm and its products appear on many courses, including Mario Kart Wii's Moonview Highway and Mario Kart 7's Coconut Mall, among many others. One of my favorite design details of Mumu Farm itself is that the farmers took the extra step to make sure the Mumus weren't stranded on the central field by adding 2 bridges across the racetrack. Although perhaps this problem would have been better addressed by not leasing farmland out to race on. This course also pits you against a familiar Mario enemy, the Chubby? Apparently so, at least according to the game's instruction manual, where they are never referred to as Monty Moles. This is a slightly odd change, as Monty Moles had already appeared under their normal name in several Mario platformers, including Super Mario 64, which was released only months earlier. I'm not sure what anti-Monty Mole campaign was being waged by the Mario Kart team, but this was the second outing where they had to sneak in under fake IDs. In the previous installment, Super Mario Kart, they were referred to as Gophers. If we are to believe that Monty Mole is indeed a mole, the Nintendo guide for Mario Kart 64 also misidentifies them as rodents, when they technically belong to a class of mammals called insectivores. Perhaps we should be more inclined to believe the Super Mario Kart team. If Monty Moles are actually a type of gopher, they would indeed be a rodent. Regardless, the kart versions are uncharacteristically bold. Moles are not inclined to spring-loaded attacks in the wild, but will instead cease digging when they feel vibrations in the soil and change areas. Mumu Farm only reappears so far in Mario Kart DS as a retro track, although it has inspired the very similar Windmill Meadows from Home Circuit and Mumu Meadows from Mario Kart Wii. Geographically, the meadows also appear to be canonically in the same area, as a sign along the course reads Nintendo Mumu Farm. Koopa Troopa Beach. Although direct references aren't common in 64's tracks, there are a few that seem to take inspiration from Super Mario Kart. The original game's Koopa Beach is upgraded into Koopa Troopa Beach, named for the giant Koopa Troopa rock formation seen at the start of the race. There are a few notable features of the course, but chiefly among these is the track featuring the first explicit shortcut available in the game without needing an item. As mentioned, Mario Kart 64 would go on to become infamous for many broken mechanics leading to huge unintentional shortcuts, but the island's tunnel is one of the few purposeful ones built into the game. The shortcut wasn't much of a secret though, it's mentioned in both the game's manual and original website. As with Luigi Circuit, another fun detail of this course is this item box that will always bestow a spiny shell. At one point, this track was possibly intended to inspire a new course for Mario Kart DS. There's a scrapped track called Noko Noko Course, Noko Noko being the Japanese term for Koopa Troopa. The track still appears in the game files, but is unplayable without ROM hacking. Modders have restored textures though, allowing us to see the course has a similar vibe but overall different layout from its inspiration. There's a few other nods to Koopa Troopa Beach elsewhere. The Sunshine Airport track from Mario Kart 8 shows Koopa Troopa Beach as a distant formation in the background, with the faint Koopa rocks visible at a closer glance. It may also have inspired a court in Mario Hoops 3-on-3, whose Japanese translation is Koopa Troopa Beach. It does have a predominantly sandy look instead of a rocky design though, and its English name is Koopa Beach, so it's likely more inspired from the original Super Mario Kart track. This track also introduces generic crabs as an enemy to the series. You might immediately be thinking, what about the arcade Mario Bros? Well, those enemies are technically called sidesteppers, and they will mostly replace crabs in later Mario games, but in Mario Kart 64 they are just referred to as crabs in the game's manual. Technically, the generic crab first appears in the Marioverse through the Donkey Kong Country TV series. In an episode called Get a Life, Don't Save One, Dixie Kong owns a pet crab creatively named Krabby, although it's never actually seen on screen. As of now, the course's 2 retro appearances are in Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart Tour. Calamari Desert. The final track of the Mushroom Cup takes us to Calamari Desert, possibly a portmanteau of the real African Kalahari Desert and Mario. In several regions of East Asia, the track's title in-game translates instead to Dry Dry Desert. This possibly connects it with the later Double Dash track called Dry Dry Desert and even the later Wii course, Dry Dry Ruins. This makes the course something of a recurring Mario location, as Dry Dry Desert also shows up in the original Paper Mario. As further evidence that this name reappearing here isn't just incidental, the track's most iconic feature is also present in the Paper Mario level. Although named K64 here, the train is strikingly similar to the irritating train that loops through the Mario Kart track. The Calamari Desert song is even used during the train ride in Paper Mario. The frustrating train makes Calamari Desert one of the most iconic tracks from this game, from its design to its sound effects, which are sourced audio from Japanese National Railway crossings. This train also ties into another of the game's most famous shortcuts. I say this with heavy air quotes because driving off the main path to follow the train through the tunnel actually takes more time than the regular route, despite being listed as a shortcut in the game's manual. There is, however, a way to save time in the tunnel with a star, thanks to a glitch that lets you skip a lap if performed properly. Although not as prominently dangerous as the train, it's also worth looking out for the cacti that litter the course. First appearing in any form in Super Mario Bros. 2, the cactus here seems to take inspiration from the real-world saguaro. The course also shows up in one of the game's few unlockables. There's only 2 bonus features to unlock in the entire game, the first being Mirror Mode, and the second an alternate title screen, which shows the characters racing in Calamari Desert. The course makes several future comebacks in Mario Kart 7 and Tour, as well as a DLC stage in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Toad's Turnpike. Moving on to the Flower Cup, the first course isn't too complicated, at least not route-wise. A simple figure-8 circuit, what makes Toad's Turnpike stand out is it's the first track to feature traffic as a hazard, which would reappear many times as a popular obstacle in future games. Starting with the name, most other regions translate it as Toad's Highway. The English and Dutch regions, though, opted for an alliteration, which clarifies the track's name even though it isn't technically a turnpike. Turnpike refers to a toll road, which isn't acknowledged in the original game, but as a fun Easter egg update, the Mario Kart 8 Retro track added a turnpike service area to more properly capture the name. Whether a highway or a turnpike though, what is consistent is the circling traffic. I can still viscerally feel the frustration of running into cars non-stop as a kid, not helped by the ramping difficulty of the hazard as you go up in CC. The cars ramp up in speed with each higher level, but the real difficulty is when playing Extra Mode. The car's paths flip, and they are now oncoming traffic instead. If you do crash, there's a possibility you'll be taking a familiar face to court. Although not a playable character, Diddy Kong does appear as the bus driver. While the Turnpike did make the cut, it was originally planned to allow players to race some residential areas as well. A town track was discovered within the game files and reassembled by fans to give a sense of the model. This cut course was actually mentioned way back in a 1996 developer interview, where it stated the track was cut because it ended up being too large and taking too long to race. The same interview mentions another cut course that was designed as a giant parking garage that players would ascend as they raced around in circles. This one was supposedly cut because the constant turning made people feel sick in playtests. Toad's Turnpike so far has just made one retro return in Mario Kart 8, 2 if you also count it being ported to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Frap Snowland. Taking on a very different environment than any course we've seen so far, Frap Snowland takes us through a wintry wonderland where most everything is built of snow, including sculptures of both Mario and Yoshi. My favorite section of the course is the last few turns that take you through a section of tracks sunken behind towering walls of snow on either side. This area may take inspiration from the Tateyama-Kurobe Alpine Route, a sightseeing route through the Hida Mountains. During snowfall, epic walls of ice will be pushed up on either side of the path as the snow is plowed, giving an effect similar to what is seen in Frap Snowland. This is likely an area developers would have been familiar with as a popular vacation destination only about 4 hours from Nintendo's headquarters in Kyoto. The other notable snow-based addition along the route are the snowmen. Technically, the first appearance of a snowman in a Mario game was a few months earlier in Super Mario 64. The snowman has appeared as a common stage hazard from Mario Kart 64 onwards, though. As a sidebar on this, I never understood why the 64 snowmen seemed to be wearing a fez, and it wasn't until just now, looking at the HD model from Mario Kart 8, that I realized it's supposed to be a bucket. Most players tackling Frap Snowland will be taking a more casual approach, but there's a select few that have dedicated themselves to breaking Mario Kart 64 wide open. Summoning Salt has a fantastic documentary on this level's speedrun history, and trying to make Summoning Salt into Summarizing Salt could never do it justice, so I highly recommend you check out their video. In short though, speedrunners are crazy, perfecting strategies that involved abusing a time buffer between how quickly Lakitu can pick you up consecutively to drive out of bounds without penalty to a specific piece of level geometry that allows you to skip a lap. Huge skips like this are a big part of speedrunning this game. As of now, all but 5 courses have unintended shortcuts that have been discovered. This track reappears in Mario Kart DS and Mario Kart Tour. Choco Mountain. This one is something of a spiritual successor to Super Mario Kart's muddy Choco Island tracks, which in my Super Mario Kart courses video I mentioned is at least partially based on Super Mario World's Chocolate Island. As with Super Mario Kart, it's pretty firmly acknowledged as canon that Choco Mountain is not actually chocolate. Even its official description says,
Choco Mountain is not edible. I repeat, you cannot eat Choco Mountain.
What you can do though is fall off a bunch. In 50cc and time trials, helpful railings have been established across the course, but no such luxury is provided for higher cc races. One of the cruelest features of the absent railing is in this section, where falling from higher ground won't summon Lakitu, but instead make you race back around to the higher slope. This one's stretching, even for me, but the only other notable design feature of this track is the section with falling rocks. Perhaps this is inspired by the rolling rocks of Mario 64's Hazy Maze Cave? Probably not. More likely it's directly referencing signs warning of falling rocks that anyone who lives in a marginally mountainous area will be familiar with. Often the real danger is less the slim chance of a rock falling directly on a car, although this has happened, for example to an Arizona couple who narrowly escaped death when their car was crushed. But the more frequent danger is from rock slides spilling across roads and causing damage from underneath. Many roadside cliffs have been netted to prevent this, but there's no such luck on Choco Mountain. Choco Mountain is another course with an epic speedrun history. Its legacy has been impeccably documented in another Summoning Salt video. If the YouTube algorithm has ever recommended anything to you, there's a good chance you've seen it already. But if not, then it's well worth the watch. In short, the speedrunning trick here is one of the hardest and most sought after in the game, requiring extreme precision to hit a tumble at the start of the course that allows for a lap skip. This is almost impossible to hit once, let alone 3 consecutive times, but thanks to the efforts of Mario Kart legend Abney317, the speedrun record eventually achieved this near impossible feat in a run, leaving the current time trial record for all 3 laps collectively under 15 seconds. This course would see retro remakes from Mario Kart DS, Tour, and as part of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass.
A quick late-stage edit to say that a heavily modified version will also be appearing in Mario Kart World.
Mario Raceway. Rounding out the Flower Cup, Mario Raceway is a fairly straightforward track at first glance. This was intentional. The developers wanted a course that would be largely hazard-free, but with enough driving maneuvers to make it competitive for time trials. The game's website describes it as the game's official course, and the game's manual even recommends it as the developer's choice for time trials. This preference shows up in several other ways as well. Not only is this one of only 3 tracks to have a staff ghost, but most obscurely Clearly, pressing R on the title screen will display your time trial record, but only ever for this course. As is typical of the Raceway courses, the track is also lined with a variety of in-game sponsors. It packs all these ads into a relatively brief track, being the second shortest in the game, behind Mumu Farm. Even in its short length, the track pays homage to Mario's roots in a number of fun ways. At the course's start, we can see a spinning sign in the distance. Although early pre-release builds had the sign reading Nintendo, the final sign reads Go. Several other details of the track acknowledge Mario's prior platformers too. The big mushroom, of course, is reminiscent of mushroom platforms back from the original Super Mario Bros. The Mario mushroom now has a standardized red and white design, but this design, itself based off a real mushroom, the fly agaric, didn't appear until a few games in. Other nods to Mario's plumbing platformers include slightly odd-looking piranha plants, themselves also first appearing in Super Mario Bros., and the final stretch of the track having you pass through a giant warp pipe, which dates back even further to the original Mario Bros. This track may be packed with loving nods to Mario's other games, but similar attention to detail could have been used elsewhere. For example, fixing Mario voice actor Charles Martinet's misspelled credit in the Japanese version. Thus far, this course reappears as a retro track in Mario Kart Wii and Tour. Wario Stadium. The Star Cup starts with what I think of as one of the game's most iconic tracks, Wario Stadium. The track itself appears as an indoor dirt bike arena. Some odd game manual lore states that Wario himself is a fan of motocross and designed the track to better suit bikes over karts. It's fun that this track acknowledges Wario's motocross fandom, as this becomes a consistent part of his character in later games, so notable in the WarioWare series that it even makes it into his Smash Bros. Moveset. I wondered if this was the first connection of the character with motocross, but it does seem to slightly predate Mario Kart 64, as Wario first rides a motorcycle in the little-known 1994 Game Boy title Wario Blast, featuring Bomberman. This track is also one of the game's longest, second only to Rainbow Road, with another bit of goofy game manual lore stating Wario intentionally made the laps long so it would be difficult to stay focused on the race. The race wasn't long for everyone though. One of the first major glitches discovered in the game allowed players to hop over these walls to complete laps, drastically reducing it to one of the fastest races in the game for players who knew how to complete the skip. For those of us that weren't in the know and had to race through normally, you might remember suffering one of the greatest injustices of your life at the end of the track. The final stretch involves a jump over a gap, but unlike elsewhere throughout the game, if you miss this jump, Lakitu isn't interested in helping. You simply fall to the lower part of the track and have to drive up again. This troublesome jump was especially easy to exploit because if the lightning item was used, afflicted players wouldn't be able to make the jump, something I remember my older brother being keenly aware of, much to his own glee.
Another quick late-stage edit to say that a different version will appear in Mario Kart World.
Sherbet Land. Taking some inspiration from the prior game's track, SNES Vanilla Lake 2, this course involves racers driving on ice around a central lake, although this course features a cave section too. As with a few other Mario locations, the quaint name is evocative of a dessert, sherbet being a frozen treat similar to sorbet, but with a small amount of dairy. Most international course names do actually translate to Sorbet Land though. Make no mistake though, this spot is no treat. The game's manual describes it as a slippery world of ice populated by penguins and suggests all the penguins might make one think it's near the South Pole. While an interesting thought, it's likely not a correct one. Penguins cover a surprisingly wide range, including much of the coastline of South America, South Africa, and southern Australia. They also do genuinely show up in Antarctica, but penguins are coastal animals. So even though you may pass them on your journey south, they wouldn't be anywhere near the South Pole itself, at least not on Earth, but who knows what the geography of Mario's planet might look like. The penguins themselves do seem to take inspiration from their real-world counterparts, most closely resembling the little blue penguin. If we're going off release dates, the penguin does technically appear in Super Mario 64 first, but as both games were being developed simultaneously, it's hard to know where the Mario penguin was first proposed. Maybe most notable among the penguins is the huge one on the island in the lake's center. Although seemingly just scenery, this island can actually be reached One of my favorite things with these games is finding Mario Kart tracks outside of Mario Kart games, and this one has an obscure secondary appearance, as the setting for Dream Curling in Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games, a fantasy twist on the standard curling event. Although not on the track itself, the penguins do appear as spectators, and there's even an item box as part of the game. The music also reappears in Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Olympic Winter Games, although it is incorrectly attributed to Mario Kart Wii instead of this game. As for the actual track, it has only reappeared once so far, in Mario Kart Wii. Royal Raceway. The final of the Raceway tracks, this course celebrates Peach, even called Peach Circuit in some regions. This leads to my favorite element of the course, one that everyone who played Mario Kart 64 as a kid distinctly remembers the thrill of discovering and trying to explore. Going off course at one point allows you to drive around the grounds of Peach's castle, appearing almost identical to their version in Super Mario 64. The castle will also have looked familiar even to those who hadn't played Mario 64, as it's where the award ceremony takes place at the end of each cup. This popular course also shows up in Mario Kart 8 and 8 Deluxe, as well as Tour. Sadly, the drivable grounds are removed for the track's retro remake in Mario Kart 8. Peach isn't the only one whose majestic home is available for racing, however. So is her longtime rivals. Bowser's Castle. Bowser's home is here transformed into its own track. This was always one of my favorites, and there's plenty of interesting details to spot on the long and varied drive. None, though, are more iconic than the legend of Marty the Thwomp. The first interior part of the castle you visit features several thwomps that must be avoided. Thwomps themselves date back to Super Mario Bros. 3, but this unspiked version first appears in Super Mario 64. Most of Bowser's thwomps go largely unnoticed, but one in particular caught the popular imagination. At the back of the first room is an imprisoned thwomp who appears to be green instead of blue like the others. The exact origin of his name isn't known, but he popularly became referred to as Marty after 2 videos were released by YouTuber Clay McElveen that professed to show outlandish maneuvers that could be done to unlock Marty as a racer. The fundamentals involved performing specific maneuvers with Bowser before returning to Marty, at which point the bars would be lifted, indicating he was unlocked. Mario games are certainly no stranger to urban legends, but this was undoubtedly the most famous one related to Mario Kart. Sadly, no matter how hard you try, Marty remains unplayable. He isn't even all that unique after all. There are no green-hued thwomps in the game's data. He only appears that way because of the lighting in his cage. Even without Marty on the roster, you can play as one very specific part of the thwomp. Its laugh, as it's just a slowed-down version of Wario's. The aesthetic of the track is seemingly based on the Bowser's Castle stages of Super Mario Bros. 3, incorporating his portrait from that game and elements like the checkerboard floor. There's also plenty to watch out for in this stage, between lava pits and Bowser statues, also first introduced in Super Mario Bros. 3. But one thing you don't have to worry about is falling rocks. This is despite the fact that the game's manual shows an icon on the Bowser's Castle map cautioning the player to watch for falling rocks. This is actually due to a translation error. The Japanese manual only warns the player not to fall off the track, but the way it's written is very close to the falling rock warning from Choco Mountain. This version of Bowser's Castle has only reappeared in Mario Kart Wii so far. DK's Jungle Parkway. This now brings us to the Special Cup, at least in most regions. The most surprising regional change is the Chinese version of the game, where it's instead called the IQ Cup. Video gaming has a complicated history in China, with varying levels of restriction imposed over the years, including a sweeping console ban from 2000 to 2015. The ban was not absolute, however, and one of the unique exceptions was the IQ Player, a console made in partnership with Nintendo in the hope of rebranding the Nintendo 64 as a tool capable of helping children's mental and social development, while simultaneously cutting down on game piracy in China. The console was a colossal flop, however, released well into the GameCube era and just supporting a dismal 14 games, all N64 ports, it only sold around 10,000 units total. This leaves the odd name change as just one of many Nintendo curiosities. Regardless of the Cup's title, the first track is DK's Jungle Parkway. According to the manual, it is supposedly the home of Donkey Kong, which would put the parkway on Kong Island canonically, as that's where the Kong family lives. Despite this course being named for him, Donkey Kong wasn't in the original roster for the game. A prototype shown at Nintendo Space World in 1995, titled Super Mario Kart R at the time, features a number of notable differences. Chief among them is Donkey Kong's missing spot on the roster, filled instead by Kamek the Magic Koopa. Kamek was the main antagonist in Yoshi's Island, the hugely popular Super Mario World sequel that released only months before Space World, making him a logical choice for the roster at the time, despite looking like a pretty random option in retrospect. After being scrapped from Mario Kart 64, it would take 20 years for him to reappear in the karting franchise. Emblem data was actually found in Mario Kart 8, implying he was in consideration to be a racer at one point, but was once again scrapped. It wasn't until the mobile game, Mario Kart Tour, that he finally made the roster as a playable driver, and he wouldn't make a console debut until appearing as DLC for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on Switch. The choice of swap to Donkey Kong ultimately made more sense though, and allowed them to include this track more seamlessly. Nintendo also received some help with the character integration, with Rare, developer of the Donkey Kong Country series and Donkey Kong 64, even supplying the character model. The level design also definitely takes cues from the Donkey Kong Country series, perhaps being inspired by the game's opening level, Jungle Hijinks. As with most courses, there's a fair share of hazards to keep in mind. Unique to this track are the stones, which appear to be based off real-life horned melons, which are tossed by, quote, restless natives, as described in the game manual, at racers when they go off-road. While there's plenty to sightsee, including the pedal steamer with Mario written across it, most of it can actually be skipped thanks to an infamous glitch where jumping through the geometry of the cave allows you to clip and complete a lap in a matter of seconds. If you do opt to take in the scenery though, playing on original hardware can result in quite a slowdown. The dual presence of the boat and waterfall cause a noticeable dip in frame rate. This was actually counteracted so that in split screen mode the in-game timer moves slower to account for the lag. This leads to an unintended side effect when the game is emulated, for example in the Wii Virtual Console release. The lag is not present due to the improved hardware, but the counteractive measure wasn't removed, meaning the in-game timer runs faster than normal on this track in multiplayer mode. The limited processing power of the N64 leads to several minor track changes in multiplayer mode to save power. Probably the most visually noticeable is the complete absence of the paddle steamer in 3 and 4 player mode on this track. This track is another one that's only had one retro appearance for Mario Kart Wii. Yoshi Valley. This is another one that sticks with me from when I was a kid. Most notable for its branching pathways, there's a few other interesting hazards you might encounter along route. The strangest inclusion are the porcupines that appear as a stage hazard. Strange because of just how rare this is as a Mario enemy. Porcupines never reappear at any other point throughout the Mario franchise. Even when this track reappears as a retro course in Mario Kart 8, they are swapped out for Goombas. There's an enemy called the Porcupo that is very similar, which appears in Super Mario Bros. 2 and its remakes, but that's as close as you get. The most memorable hazard in this stage, though, is the giant rotating egg that appears towards the end of the lap. There are 6 separate paths throughout this canyon maze, but they all converge at the end and pass this giant egg, which is naturally based on a Yoshi egg given this course's theme. We actually see Yoshi's egg in Mario before we ever see Yoshi, as the very first Yoshi we meet in Super Mario World is hatched from an egg. I suppose this may technically be considered a giant egg though here, which first appears in Super Mario World 2. This track is yet another with a famous glitch. A correctly positioned jump over this fence into the void will have Lakitu position the player by the finish line and, having successfully confused the game, count it as a lap. This course shows up as a retro track in Mario Kart 8 and 8 Deluxe, as well as Mario Kart Tour. Banshee Boardwalk. Going off the in-game track length, Banshee Boardwalk clocks in just shy of half a mile. This is a reasonably mid-tier length track, but pretty stubby for an actual boardwalk. The world's largest real-world boardwalk is in America. New Jersey's Atlantic City Boardwalk stretches for 5.5 miles, 9 kilometers. Perhaps it's for the best that the track isn't too long though, as it's filled with plenty of spooky sights to encounter as is. The first notable sight is the oversized Cheep Cheep that jumps over the track, thankfully of no consequence to players. Cheep Cheeps go back to the original Super Mario Bros., but the first time we saw a supersized one was actually only a year after Super Mario Bros. Release, in the Japanese TV special that roughly translates to Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach. This special is of note for being been widely recognized as the first film adaptation of a video game. It's not the only animal encounter you'll face though on Banshee Boardwalk. After heading past the spooky welcome sign taking you into an abandoned building, you'll encounter a flock of bats, unless you're in time trial mode where they're absent, as hitting walls and obstacles in Mario Kart 64 invalidates your time trial. The generic bat technically only appears in Mario Kart 64, although the very similar swoop has appeared throughout the series, including replacing the bat when this track reappears in Mario Kart DS. The spooky atmosphere of the course is also heightened by the tense music, dominated by persistent xylophone and noises resembling a revving engine. Mixed into the theme are also familiar refrains from the Ghost Valley theme of Super Mario Kart. Also in the mix are the hovering boos, which don't interact with you but simply provide a menacing ambiance. Boos date back to Super Mario Bros. 3, where they were originally known as Boo Diddleys, a spooky play on R&B singer Bo Diddley. They also tie into the Banshee theme, as a banshee is a type of ghost, although specifically referring to a female spirit in Irish folklore that heralds the death of a family member by wailing. So far, its only retro appearance is in Mario Kart DS. Rainbow Road. Rounding out the racetracks is this game's rendition of Rainbow Road, continuing the tradition established in Super Mario Kart of each game having its own Rainbow Road. This one stands out for its epic length. It's over double the length of most tracks in the game, and needs around 2 minutes of driving time to complete a single lap. This makes it the longest 3-lap course in the entire franchise. It's also notable for being one of the safest Rainbow Roads, as the entire course has railing. It's not hazard-free though, as giant chain chomps appear throughout the track. Initially conceived for the Legend of Zelda series, and later actually appearing in a few Zelda games, the chain chomp is actually based on a childhood experience of Shigeru Miyamoto, where he was almost bitten by a dog, but it was restrained by its leash just in time. They first appeared in Super Mario Bros. 3. Even though there's a few dangers along Rainbow Road, there's also plenty of pretty sights to look at. Filling out the void are neon portraits of all 8 playable racers, as well as a boo and a mushroom. There's also a big smiling star that you'll encircle at one point, probably based on the Superstar power-up. The course has been remade a couple times, of course appearing as a retro course in Mario Kart 8. Long before its recreation for Mario Kart though, it has a second and far more surprising reappearance, F-Zero X. Functionally, a recreation of this track appears in that game's Joker Cup, although it is scaled up to account for the faster driving, and the Mario branding is also removed, leaving the background largely a void and the chain chomps converted to minefields. Players who used the track with the Nintendo 64 DD expansion were also treated to a hard rock remix of the Rainbow Road theme. If you don't feel like playing the entire course, you don't have to, as this track has another famous shortcut using a well-timed hop to skip a huge portion of the track. If you don't want to play the course at all, you can still get part of the experience thanks to a weird Easter egg on the title screen. Waiting for 50 minutes on the title sequence without pressing anything will cause a secret remix of the Rainbow Road theme to play. It's not the only odd place you can find this theme. It also reappears in part on the World 9 map in New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and even shows during the Rainbow Road section of Paper Mario Color Splash. This version of Rainbow Road can also be played again in Mario Kart 8 and 8 Deluxe. Mario Kart isn't all about racing though. The often overlooked battle mode includes 4 unique courses, starting with Big Donut. This arena is incredibly simple, truly just a big donut surrounded by lava with a few walls for strategic hiding. The only odd detail I could find with this one is that, for some reason, there are 2 misplaced item boxes that actually appear under the course. It reappears as a retro track in Mario Kart 7. Block Fort. Also fairly straightforward, the second arena is a series of multi-tiered blocks, all seemingly floating in a body of water. These blocks were purposefully designed to be highly contrasting so that you could easily scout an opponent on the mini-map. Block Fort likely inspired later battle arenas like Block City in Double Dash and Block Plaza from Mario Kart Wii. It also appears itself as a retro course in Mario Kart DS, although strangely, the typical prefix showing which game it originated in is not present for this arena. Double Deck. This arena is similar in design and size to Block Fort, but purposefully without any color coding to its sections, making it a tougher course to actually locate rivals. Perhaps the increased difficulty of finding other players was not appreciated, as the arena hasn't yet reappeared in any subsequent game. Skyscraper. And to round things out, here was my favorite battle stage as a kid. Set atop a skyscraper, this stage was intentionally designed to be easy to fall from, adding an extra strategy beyond item use. The arena reappears as a retro track for Mario Kart Wii. There's not too much else to say about this one, so I'm going to close things out here with one last bit of obscure trivia. If this wasn't enough Mario Kart 64, there's a way to sneak one last game in, and that's by buying a ticket to Europe that conveniently includes a first-class time travel feature that can drop you off in 1996, at which point, if you visit a few specific casinos, you can play the bizarre, licensed, limited edition Mario Kart 64 slot machine. Thanks very much for watching, we'll catch you in the next one.